Hello, I'm Jeff Walker. Welcome to System Catalyst, the podcast that cracks the code for making the world a better place. One of the taglines of this show is, "We can't fix the world alone." We say that because we firmly believe that the only way to solve the world's biggest problems is through partnerships. And when we say partnerships, we're talking long-term partnerships that both strengthen and grow over time. In other words, those that can change the world. Easier said than done, right? I mean, people change, issues change, and the more partners, the more complicated it gets. Well, don't worry, because on today's show, we've got a partnership expert who will set you up for success. Jean Oelwang is founder and CEO of Virgin Unite, the philanthropic arm of the Virgin Group. A couple of years ago, she wrote the book, Partnering, which compiles all the lessons she's learned from her own experience and from dozens of interviews. Today, she shares some of that wisdom with us. She even tells us the story of when she embarrassed herself in front of a U.S. president. So if you're a young change maker who wants to collaborate more, or a veteran system catalyst who wants to strengthen existing partnerships, listen up. You'll learn a lot from Jean.
Hey, Jean.
Hi, Jeff.
So you started with working at Virgin Mobile, right? And different countries around the globe, and then became a different kind of partner. How did you first connect, and then how did you get into the role at Virgin Unite?
So the first part of my career was mainly helping start mobile phone companies in different emerging markets. But then I took what I would call disruptive detours. And I was a Vista volunteer in America with homeless teenagers, which probably was the biggest learning lesson I ever had in my life. And then I moved because I was excited to learn about the kind of not-for-profit environmental sector. So I went to work for the National Parks and Wildlife Foundation in Australia. And then I got a call from Virgin and they said, would you come help us start up a mobile phone company in Australia? So I pivoted back into the corporate sector. And then I was acting co-CEO with a fantastic partner at Virgin Mobile. And I overheard Richard talking in the car one time about wanting to do more philanthropically. So I went home and built a business plan and sent it to him. And I will never forget standing in Australia in Sydney, and he called me on the phone and he said, let's do this. And I hung up the phone, danced around the house, and that was really the start of Virgin Unite, which is literally next year, 20 years ago. And so I found a replacement and then moved to London, and then we started Unite.
Wow, love that. So true entrepreneurship within the organization, which is rare, being able to come up with a brand new idea and have an organization you're part of saying, good, let's go for this. He had trust in you, I guess, right? Or he was a classic entrepreneur, or kind of what did he see?
Yeah, I think one of the things I've learned from him is having that trust in people, having that belief in people, and just taking risk and being willing to kind of embrace something new and a big idea and getting enthusiastic, excited about it, and then kind of building that momentum. And he's absolutely brilliant at that.
Then you started Virgin Unite and grew it. And you said up to 19 collections of collaboratives over the years, from the elders, on to the African collaborative that we've worked on and a variety of other things. So, talk to us about, the general role that you play as a system catalyst. Talk about how it all kind of strategy-wise looks to you.
Yeah, and it's been a really interesting journey, Jeff, because I think in the beginning, we had about 25 businesses in about 15 industries. So we were very focused at the start of Unite and how do we embed purpose at the center of them. And then we started to think about what were the systems we wanted to change. And one was definitely around conflict, peaceful conflict resolution, because we felt like unless you have conflict resolution, you can't really do anything else within that country. So we were very fortunate. Richard and my boss, Richard Branson and Peter Gabriel, had an idea called the Elders, which was around, bringing together a group of global leaders that would work on behalf of humanity with no other agenda but that of people and the planet. And then that kind of kicked off, and that ended up being this amazing group of 12 global leaders, everyone from Kofi Annan to Mary Robinson to President Carter, that really came together as a collective to work behind the scenes to help resolve conflicts, but also to drive systems change, whether that was around how do we relook at the UN Security Council? How do we look at, for example, ending child marriage? So they kind of took on, and right now they're very focused on existential threats. So pandemics, climate, nuclear. But that was kind of the first collective of leaders we got off the ground. And we learned a ton around that one, around what we did right, how to authentically collaborate. And then we kind of looked at other systems that we wanted to change. And the next one was around environment. So we started something called the Carbon War Room, which merged with Rocky Mountain Institute. And that merger was a good example of systemic collaboration where the two coming together are now 10 times the impact that each of us had on our own. Really, our role in Unite is we're the catalyst. We come up with, not come up with the idea, because we usually partner to come up with the ideas. We pull the idea together by listening to a ton of people all over the world. And then we take that idea and we bring together a group of partners around it. So we've never done anything on our own. Every single one of these has been a collaborative effort with amazing partners like Omidyar, Sall, Elma, you on the Africa Partner Collective, a whole host of them. And then we bring in a great management team, best of the best in the world. We spin them out to become completely independent so no one's biased view can get in the middle of changing what they do. So they can only, as my friend Andrea always says, only work on behalf of the universe.
After 2 decades leading Virgin Unite, Jean has become an expert in building movements and partnerships. And in some cases, she learned those lessons the hard way.
One of the groups that we learned a ton from is we spent the last 5 years really studying the community who protected the ozone layer. And they were great at having an open tent, so bringing in all kinds of voices, but also really good at determining if someone was actually in the tent, but really focused on blowing up the tent, of removing that person. And I think that was a lesson I had to learn along the way. And I made the mistake probably in the early years of often thinking, I have to keep everyone in the tent, and not realizing that sometimes there's some people that are actually going to undermine the initiative. And how do you to have the courage to remove them from the tent? But in saying that too, I think one big lesson that we learned early on when we were doing the elders is, I had Jeff come from the corporate sector. I spent 18 years building mobile phone companies around the world. So when I first came to Virgin Unite and Richard was like, okay, we're going to start this elders, I went away and spent like 3 months on my own perfecting this PowerPoint presentation, thinking this is what the idea is going to be. And I remember going into that gathering with my perfect PowerPoint presentation. And the first night, Richard and Peter saying, no PowerPoint presentations. We want this to be really intimate. So I remember all night staying up and creating these flip charts. And I'll never forget sitting in front of this room of many of my heroes and sitting in front of this room with my flip chart. And I can remember President Carter sitting, maybe about 10 feet in front of me. And his piercing blue eyes were just staring at me when I'm doing these flip charts. And I'm thinking, this is amazing. He loves this idea. This is brilliant. And then at the end, he stood up and he said, I don't believe in this idea. I don't think it's going to work. And I literally, Jeff, wanted to just melt into the cement, never come back out again. And I remember looking at the back of the room and seeing Richard and Peter and their faces had just fallen to the floor. And I remember after that, we all scurried into Richard's office and we were just silent. We didn't know what to do. And then we kind of pulled ourselves together because we had such belief in the idea and each other. And we made this big change where we threw away the PowerPoint presentation. We went out into the room and we really authentically listened and co-created with everyone that was in that room from all over the world. And we did that for those 2 weeks. And you had Carter and Tutu sitting there for hours creating the values and the purpose. And I can tell you when we left after that 2 weeks, that idea was 1 trillion times better than the idea that we went in with. And, years later, when Carter was in his 90s, he stood up at his farewell drinks to the elders. And he said that this was one of the most important things he's ever done in his whole life. I tell you that long story because it's a story of really how we learned to authentically co-create. and how we learned that it was really about listening to the people who understood the issues. And we never, ever made that mistake again in the subsequent 20 years. We always made sure that we truly co-created, and that's what has built initiatives that have lasted this long.
So learning points would be, I don't have all the answers, that I need to co-create with my partners and listen, but you still can provide leadership. You can provide some assistance to help them work together, to follow up as they leave the room, and that they have other priorities of their own, but you keep them focused on what they set as a priority as a team.
As you can tell, I'm a big fan of Jean's, and I thoroughly enjoyed her book, Partnering. In it, Jean interviews over 65 successful partnerships to find out what makes them tick. She found a few common traits.
I really became focused on two questions some 20 years ago. One was, how do we build these deep connections in our lives? And a lot of that at the time was a personal journey for me. And the second one, it was really around how do you then take those deep connections and ladder them up into big collaborations. So a big part of the book was also interviewing the ozone community for the last, 6-10 years, talking to people like Larry Brilliant that were part of the community that helped end smallpox in India, talking to a whole bunch of people that were part of bringing down apartheid in South Africa. And what we found in all of these collaborations was this group of deep connections at the center. Yeah, this is a super important point, and I think one that people miss because they think we're just going to bring together a bunch of people, it's going to be magic, and they're going to work together for years. And we've never seen that in any of the 20. There has to be a ton of what I would call connective tissue in the background to make something really work and really sing, and most importantly, really last for the long term. And so, like, if I look at the role, and we learned a lot from, again, the community who did the ozone work, because they had a lesson that I really always think about now and take into my heart, which is start and strengthen, is get a small group of very committed people together that are there for the long run. And they're going to work through the hard moments. They're going to be there in a decade's time after you've got through all those ups and downs and, have the organization really working in sync. The other things we've learned is how to make sure that roles and responsibilities are really clear at the center of these initiatives so that people are, not just coming up to be there, but they're coming up and they're going to not be anonymous. They're going to be conspicuous. So they're going to actually do things that actually deliver. And the other thing that's really important is having a lot of celebrating moments of incremental moments, I would call them. Because I think sometimes we make those mistakes where we just set these moonshots that are almost impossible to reach. And so these collaboratives fall away because it's disappointing. Every time you get on a call, you're thinking we're not getting there. But celebrating those incremental steps that you can see you're taking to that moonshot, that eventual moonshot that may take, beyond our lifetimes. But then two things that I hadn't expected that were really important. One was what we ended up calling magnetic moments, were that really thoughtful traditions, rituals that brought people together and kept them connected, like our, weekly calls during COVID, or like with the elders, them coming together. We interviewed the founders of Airbnb, had one they called Elephants, Dead Fish, and Vomit, where they brought their team together to have really open, honest conversations about the elephants in the room no one was talking about, and the dead fish that everyone was talking about, no one was doing anything about, and then the vomit of things people just needed to get off their chest. And they talked about how that built trust to have that open conversation. But the other thing that when we did the interviews that was really central that we hadn't expected was what we ended up calling celebrate friction. Because none of them were void of friction. They all had friction, every single one of these partnerships, but they created tools to lift above that friction so it didn't destroy their partnership. So that one became really central.
You got that? Just in case, here's a short list of what Jean found in all successful social change partnerships. Number 1, have a tight-knit and committed group at the core of your partnerships. Number 2, make sure each person's role is clear and visible. Number 3, celebrate the small victories as much as the big ones. Number 4, create opportunities for people to voice their concerns. Number 5, Have regular gatherings or magnetic moments, as Jean calls them, to keep everyone together. Speaking of meetings.
So your gatherings have become a bit historic in whether it's the Audacious Prize or, figuring out, ways to bring people together for these discussions. How do you use that gathering capability in people who trust you so they'll show up? But if it's not interesting, then they won't stay, right?
Yeah. And I think those gatherings, one of the most important things is that those gatherings are in a place that allow people to step away from their day to day, because you want to be able to build trust in a place where they're not going to be distracted. And, May Bové once said this beautiful thing where trust is built, every day on the hundreds of different actions that we have and how we show up in the world. And, one of the people directors at Virgin Group used to say that we make or break our culture and every single interaction we have. So it's the million magic moments. So I think it's that consistency and showing up with that sense of purpose and that clarity of purpose. So when people come together to gather, they're almost lifted immediately away from their egos or away from their everyday because they're excited about that intoxicating purpose of why they've come there. And I think the second is how you curate the group that helps you bring people together. Like with the audacious ideas, we were so lucky, Chris Anderson from TED was amazing at the center of this. Jeff Skoll was amazing at the center of this, as were a whole bunch of partners.
Maybe define audacious for us.
Yes, Audacious Projects was an idea that came up through Chris Anderson, through Richard, through Jeff, through a bunch of folks who came together, and they decided that they wanted to allow philanthropists to have these opportunities at a big play. So not just say, a couple million, a few million, but in the 100 million range, so that they could fly and then do what they knew how to do and really drive some massive, significant change in the world. So that was kind of the premise of the idea. And just to see Jeff, it was beautiful with that one, to see the group of about 10 funders that came around him in that very first Audacious, just how excited they were as well. Like watching Richard, it was one of the most exciting moments because he wasn't doing it by himself. He was doing it with this group of 10 other funders who were extraordinary individuals and also, with Ted, with Chris, who then were able to communicate it in a way that none of us could have done through the TED community. So it was that kind of that collective of bringing together those pieces and having the right people at the table, but also having the right voices at the table, like the Andrews at the table, the other people from the front lines that actually understand what's happening and letting them be the ones to run with it.
So it seemed to work. So people keep wanting to come back, right? So trust is there. There's a process there, but it learns and grows too. So it all kind of connects with each other, but we're learning along the way. You talk about these local actors, Andrew Young and some others. How do you find who the proximate leaders are that can be exposed to these donor collaboratives?
Yeah, and thanks for bringing up this word proximity, because I think it's probably one of the most important things we all want to learn. And, I think, we learned a lot from Brian Stevenson, who kind of was the first one to start using that word in a significant way through EJI and the work that he does with prisoners on death row. And, my whole life was changed by listening to him speak at TED the first time and, learning about proximity and getting proximate to the prisoners as Brian does has been an amazing shift, and proximate to people who live in poverty. And so I feel like proximity is such an important thing for us all to learn. I feel like with Andrew, for example, he took a group of us on the ground in Rwanda to get proximate with the smallholder farmers so that we really understood what was being funded, what was happening. But I think it's important to do it in a way that he did, which is one of respect, where those partners on the ground, those smallholder farmers, are equal partners. So we're not going there as, I think often you see poverty tourism, what I would call, where people are just going to observe rather than going to authentically listen. And I think the other mistake we all make sometimes is that we go and we're not really there to authentically listen. We're there to think of how we solve the problem. And it's not about us solving the problem. It's about the people on the ground having the solutions that we can then give them the power to actually scale. And so I think there's a difference in how we get proximate. I once interviewed Cornel West and Robert Georges And Robert George is, for those of you who know him, is far right. Cornel West is far left. Couldn't be more different on so many views. But they have this beautiful partnership. It's what they call spiritual friendship, even though they have deep divides and deep differences. And when I ended that interview, they said to me, go out and find a friend that unsettles you. So I think in the sense of proximity, it's not just thinking about the people that we love to be with and that we get along with and that we're like. It's thinking about who do we get proximate to that is radically different than us, that has radically different views than us, so they can help us learn a different way. And so I would couple that proximity with this beautiful phrase that they shared with me, friends that unsettle you, and put the two together. And I think that's what's really going to help us change the world, especially in this time of division right now.
So imagine you're a young change maker, could be in a corporate nonprofit, one of the fellows or out of an MBA or an MPP program, who wants to partner with others and focus on an issue. What's their first step? Do they just say, raise their hand and I'm going to do this? Or what do they do?
Yeah, I think they need to first find what I would call not just the fire in their belly, but the bonfire in their belly. So what are the things that are really going to make them passionate? And so I think it's first like thinking about what is that fire in your belly and not being so tied to it that it can't evolve over time. So I think that's a really important part of it. I think the second is really, taking that advice from Cornel West and Robert George and thinking about who are those friendships that are going to make you feel uncomfortable? Who are the unlikely partnerships that you're going to want to bring in the tent? And then thinking about who you need to get around the table, like who is that right mix to start off the partnership? And I think really pausing. And, I think sometimes right now we've been so focused in our lives on thinking of hyper-individualism that we've pointed people away from one another. So I'd say to people that are thinking about collaborating, really changing the lens of how they look at partnerships and not thinking about their partnerships of what they can get from that partnership, but thinking about what they can give back to the world through their partnerships. And that will change the dynamic of how they bring those people into their lives. So doing that relationship reset. And I think the other thing I would tell them is have joy, because we have a long road ahead of us right now. And I don't know about you, Jeff, but I'm seeing so many people who are becoming despondent and becoming overwhelmed. And we don't have the luxury to do that. We are in positions right now where we need to continue this fight. And so I think having that resilience, and partnerships are going to give us that resilience. And they're also going to give us that joy, that ability to want to keep on going. And we can't lose that.
So joy and play, right? I've seen one of your interviews and it talked about that. So how do you integrate, the fun part of this?
Yeah, I think we take ourselves much too seriously. And from, all the 65 partnerships that we interviewed for the book Partnering, what we found is they all didn't take themselves so seriously, but they took the work seriously. And they weren't afraid to be silly, and they weren't afraid to be the one bringing that joy into the room. And, I think sometimes we think, oh, joy just has to be spontaneous, otherwise. And sometimes you have to bring in some joy that's perhaps manufactured in the beginning and then becomes this moment of lightness. And, we did that with the Africa Partner Collective. I don't know if you were on that call where at the end of the year, we always did this karaoke event. And, people brought a different side of them into it. And it sounds so silly, but it's those moments where you can open up that space. People can have fun together. And you have to be the one that's willing to take that risk and open that space. Because I think, again, we take ourselves far too seriously. I can remember when I first started at Virgin, coming from corporate America, I went to Richard with this agenda for our gatherings that started in the morning at 7:30 and ended at 6. And I packed in all this content, all these different speakers. And I thought, this is amazing. And he just ripped it up. And what we do now is from 8 in the morning to 12 at lunch, we have content and speakers. And then we spend the afternoon doing things together that are playful and fun, that really allow us to get to know one another. And I can tell you those afternoons have changed the dynamic incredibly about how we all work together and partner.
That's it for today's show. Please don't forget to subscribe to System Catalyst so you don't miss out on the new episodes. Also, do us a huge favor by rating our podcast in leaving us a review. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll catch you all in the next episode. Before we go, I'd like to thank our producers at Human Group Media. We'd also like to thank our incredible network of partners who are supporting our mission: the Skoll Foundation, the Aspen Institute's Aspen Global Leadership Network, Echoing Green, DRK Foundation, Maverick Collective, Virgin Unite, Charlize Theron Africa Outreach Project, Boldly Go Philanthropy, Synergos, Forward Global, Nexus, and New Profit. If you're interested in becoming a System Catalyst and would like to learn more about our partners, please visit systemcatalyst.com.